Hey everyone, I recently did a video on the Minis forum BD790i SE, and it got me to thinking, like, they have a newer model out, and honestly I've had this PC over here right behind me for a while with the 7950X, and it's all right, but I never seem to think it performed as well as it should. It's the cooler I got in there is loud, and I've never been happy with it. The motherboard has a little fan on it that is just horribly loud unless you put it on silent, and then it's pretty much worthless at that point. So I was thinking to myself, you know what, I'm going to give this new 7945HX motherboard that Minis Forum has a shot and see how it runs compared to my 7950X. And I'm probably just going to replace it because as far as what I've seen for benchmarks, there's not a huge difference. And the other one's going to consume far less power and be much quieter. And there is some potential from what I've read that you can actually even put an AIO on the thing. So I'm imagining if I could put an AIO on a mobile chip and keep it that much cooler, it should be able to boost even better. This one currently gets to like 5.4 at the most, and I think it's supposed to get to 5.7. But I doubt that's ever going to be achievable in a small case. This is the SSUPD Meshlicious. And I just don't think I'm ever going to see those speeds with the temps that it gets. So I'm going to run a few benchmarks first on my own PC just to see how it performs, and then we're going to put together this new PC. Actually, it's going to be a few weeks. I'm just doing this first part because I'm going to be taking this thing apart tonight because I have to send the power supply back and get it RMA'd because the fans are going bad. So I just want to get everything prepped and out of the way, and in a few weeks when I get the new parts, then I can benchmark everything fully. So let me start the benchmarks on my 7950X, and then we'll compare it to the 7945HX. I ended up rebuilding this PC 3 different times, so if you see clips that are out of order or parts that may seem different than they were the clip before, that is why. So let me explain what happened. I decided to go with the Corsair 2000D ITX case, mostly because it can fit a 360 AIO in it and a very long video card like the 7900 XTX I have. One of the other reasons is it also doesn't require a riser cable, which is what you usually find in these ITX cases. In the past, I've had a lot of issues with riser cables failing, and when you have an ITX case, it's kind of a pain to tear the whole thing apart. So when I saw this option for an ITX case without a riser, I took it. The first time I built in this case, I ran into a problem of the frame being slightly tweaked so the top wouldn't sit flat on the case. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the build. But because of this, I had to tear down the build and have a case replaced by Newegg. The second time I built it, the clip at the end of the PCI Express slot snapped off. This usually wouldn't be an issue with the card sitting horizontally, but because it sits vertically in the case, it needed the clip to hold that end of the card in securely. So I ended up upgrading to a B850 motherboard. That brings us to the third time I rebuilt the computer, and thankfully that worked out. At the top of the case, we have room for a SFX power supply. On the side, you have room for a 360 radiator, and you also have room for a 2.5-inch drive. Then on the front, you have 3 120mm fans. The bracket for your radiator or fans on the side comes out very easy. It's just 2 screws holding it in on one side and a couple of notches holding it in on the other. Previously, I was using a Corsair 200mm AIO to cool my 7950X, and it really wasn't doing a very good job with the CPU often hitting 95C, even with a custom PBO curve set. I know 95C is normal with these CPUs now, but because it was hitting those temps, it wasn't allowing the CPU to fully boost to its full potential. I did some research and looked at some benchmarks, and it looked like the only AIO that was going to properly cool the CPU was going to be one with a 360 rad. There was also the option of a custom loop, but I've done that in the past and I really didn't want to do it again. So I ended up going with the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. For my motherboard, I went with an ASRock Phantom Lightning B850i Lightning Wi-Fi motherboard. This is pretty much the same as the previous B650E motherboard I had from them. I think the only real difference is this one supports higher speed RAM. Otherwise, they both have PCI Express 5. They have one PCI Express Gen 5 NVMe slot on the front. But otherwise, yeah, they're pretty much all the same. For the AIO, I had to remove the stock mounts that come on the motherboard. For the AIO mount, you have 4 spacers that drop down over the 4 mounting holes on your motherboard. You then have 2 brackets that are labeled L and R. Don't mess this up like I did, since according to the guide, it matters depending if you are using AM4. For my RAM, I used G.Skill Trident Z. I only have the RGB version because it was the set I had used in my old PC build that had a clear side window. It is 6000 MHz DDR5 with a cast latency of 30. For my CPU, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using my old 7950X. I originally picked this CPU because I wanted to do more than gaming, plus the X3D variants really don't make any difference when you game at 4K like I do. At this point I realized I messed up because by screwing down the brackets for the AIO, it blocks the socket from opening up, so I couldn't put my CPU in. So I then had to remove the brackets just to drop in the CPU. At this point, I also realized I messed up when I put the brackets down the first time and I had left and right reverse, so I figured I might as well just fix it while I had them both off. When I went to apply my thermal paste, I first went for my MX6 and realized the tube was empty. I then grabbed another tube and it was almost empty and the paste was pretty dry. I finally found some no-namer brand that I had lying around, which was also pretty dry, but at least it had something and it worked temporarily till I could order some more MX6. With everything installed, it was pretty easy to mount the AIO. There was just 2 screws that screwed down into the brackets on the side of the socket. On the front of the motherboard, hidden underneath the heatsink, is the Gen 5 M.2 slot. I'm not using a Gen 5 drive, there really is no point for me at least, and the Gen 4 drive I'm using has read and write speeds of about 7,000 megabytes, which is more than enough for my use. The power supply I have is a little overkill, but it was this or an 850 watt, and I wanted something a little bit better for this PC. I'm using the Cooler Master V1100 SFX Platinum PSU. It's 1100 watts and has the 12 volt high power connector, though I'm not sure if I'll be using that anytime in the future since I'll probably be sticking with my 7900 XTX for a while. The reason you see me unboxing this is because I had to RMA it due to one of the ball bearings going bad in the fan, and it was just too annoying for me to deal with. The power supply wasn't too difficult to install. There was just a few screws holding it in at the top of the case. If I were to go back and do it again though, I would plug in the modular cables first because it was kind of tricky plugging them in after the PSU was mounted in the case. Because the way the PSU is mounted, the case comes with a cable that allows you to run the power from the top down the back. Another mistake I almost made was forgetting to plug in my second 4TB NVMe drive to the rear M.2 slot. Luckily, the case's cutout allowed me barely enough room to squeeze the drive in. Wire management on this thing was not fun. Because of the layout, I had to make sure all the wires were clear, otherwise they were hitting the fans on the radiator. Before I fully assembled this thing, I decided to go ahead and just turn it on just to make sure everything was working. And I ran into this. So I turned it on. And I'll boot in a second here. Okay, there we go. Solid light on the front. And we got a picture. But notice how these front fans are not lit up. You do see some RGB, but that's coming from the RAM on the inside of the PC. These fans are supposed to be RGB. Now, I spent about 20 minutes trying to figure out why they are not working, and let me show you why. So this RGB controller is in the case. What I found out was, if you look at it carefully, you can see like right here it says port 4. It's harder to see the other ones, but they're all labeled. And what I did is since I have, for wire management, I was trying to do two of the longer ones, like let's say on this far side here, and then like the shorter one on this side here. The problem is you have to have them in order. So like this side I think is port 1, 2, and 3. You have to have them plugged into 1, 2, and 3. You can't have like one in port 2 and then one in like 6 and 5. They just won't work. So you have to plug them in order. If you run into the same issue, that's what it is. So I just booted up the PC. Just wanted to show you the BIOS real quick, that I don't have any kind of overclocking or anything to lower the temperatures on here. So if we go to the OC tweaker, gaming mode is disabled, which basically just disables one of the CCDs. Performance boost is auto. Performance preset, everything is pretty much set to auto. Only thing that isn't is the memory frequency. I have the, what's it called right here, the Expo 6000 setup. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out of that. We're gonna go ahead and exit. So I'm in Elder Scrolls Online because it is a fairly CPU heavy game. So right now the game is maxed out all settings. Let's go over here to my temperatures and everything. So first off, let's look at the, let's see here, let's go to that. You can see all the cores are sitting here about 5.4, 5.5 gigahertz. They do bounce around a little bit, but that's just because of usage. If we go down to your temperatures here, and you can see I'm only hitting like maybe low 50s, high 40s. One core's at 60, but it's staying pretty cool. So let me go ahead and jump into another game, or let's do Cinebench. I'll show you what it does there. So I've had Cinebench running for a few minutes here. You can see we've done a little over 5 minutes so far. There's my CPU, the score it's running at the moment. If I go over here, you look at the cores, each of them is running about 5.1, 5.2 gigahertz. And then if I go down to the temperatures, now you do see some red there. That is going to be normal, but take a look on the right. That is going to be the, as you can see here, it says the average. So the far right here is going to be your average temperature. And I did reset this right before, or right as I started this, so it wouldn't be, the average temperature wouldn't go lower because the game I was playing previously that had a lower temp. So going through this, you see, you know, what do we got? For the cores, we have 75, 83, 78, 88, 78, 87, 77, 81. I mean, going through, you can see them here. I'd say the average is probably in the low 80s, which running Cinebench and having low 80s on this CPU is just amazing, especially for using an AIO. So when I went to make this video, it was more about just showing you my new build and going through the process and everything. I never really intended to do a review or anything like that, but I figured since I've already done all this, I might as well tell you about my experiences with the case, the AIO, and the new motherboard I bought, all the new parts that I had to replace. So let's start off with the case. So the case isn't perfect, but for my needs, it worked out very well. Like I said, I had to rebuild this multiple times. The first time I had to rebuild it was because the case I got in the mail, the first one, it had actually been damaged. So this case is pretty cheap, honestly. It cost me 60 bucks. The steel is not reinforced very well, so it will kind of bend pretty easy, especially when you don't have the side panels on, which is what caused the first one to just, like, the top panel wouldn't sit on correctly. And the video card wouldn't seat right in the, on the motherboard because the way it had to screw in. It didn't work well. So the second one I got, it wasn't damaged. That worked out fine. I really do like the airflow. The mesh on all sides makes it work pretty well. I will say the only downside is the back side of it, where the video card is venting or it's taking air in. If you take the mesh cover off and just let it breathe normally, it drops the GPU temperature quite a bit. But besides those things, overall, it's a pretty good case, especially if you plan to just sit it here at home. Don't take it around with you like the LAN parties and stuff where it can potentially get damaged in shipping or moving it around. It's a pretty good case. So the next item would be the motherboard. I've been using ASRock for several generations now, and I like them for the price. This board, unfortunately, I don't know what to say about it. It's basically identical to my previous B650 board. The only difference is it supports higher RAM speed. Now, my biggest problem is I swear when I was looking at their product page, it said it had USB 4 with 9000 series CPUs. I don't know if that was a typo that they corrected, but when I got the board and I looked at the box, it did not say USB 4. I went back to their webpage, it's not there. So I don't know if I just misread it or what, but I swear it said USB 4 support when I bought the thing and when I looked at their product page. Other than that, everything's identical. Like I said, to my previous boards, got Gen 5 NVMe for one slot, PCI Express 5.0 for your what's called your video card. It's got the higher RAM speeds, but other than that, it's a motherboard, nothing special about it. And it's a little weird. So my previous board, I never had this issue. There was a little bit of coil whine off the video card, which you would think is a video card issue. But I put this motherboard on or in, and anytime it is using any kind of video game at all, I am getting coil whine now. So I don't know what's going on with that, but it's a little annoying, but I'm gonna deal with it, I guess. Otherwise, this is a $200 motherboard. If you're looking for ITX and you want to do a 800 series board with AMD, it's probably one of the more affordable ones that works well. Now, the last product I bought, the AIO, that is probably my favorite thing out of all of this. It's a 360 millimeter radiator. It's under $100. It manages to keep my AMD 7950X cool and within the thermal threshold that AMD has set, and even lower actually, allowing it to boost much higher than I could before with my old Corsair 280. So if you need a good cooler, for a high-end chip, and you don't want to go custom loop, this is probably one of the better ones you're going to find. So that is pretty much everything for this video. Thank you all for watching. If you do follow my channel regularly, I usually try to put out a video about once a month. It may be a couple months before I put another one out. I am going in for knee surgery tomorrow, and then I have another surgery a couple weeks after that for something else. So it's going to be a while before you see anything else. My next video, I do actually want to do something a little different. I'm going to be doing a review on my new car I got. I'm not going to say what it is yet, but it involves a lot of tech stuff, which is the reason I'm doing it, because car stuff with tech in it, I love it. So anyway, that is everything for this video. I will see you guys sometime in the future.